Good morning, everyone. I hope you're all rested and well, and welcome to this amazing panel session on Is Higher Education Still Valuable here at WISE 2021 in Doha, Qatar. What an honor to be here. I will tell you, this is an amazing event, an amazing city, and an amazing panel to discuss a very important topic about higher education. First, to my right here, an amazing young lady, Archika Dogra. She's founder of Innovators. Welcome to the panel. I have Ben Nelson. He is chairman, founder of the Minerva Project, Minerva University. Ben, welcome to the panel. I have Francisco Marmolejo. He is president of higher education at the Qatar Foundation. What an honor, sir, to have you here. And Nieves Segovia, she's president SEK Education Group. Nieves, welcome to the panel. How are all you all? Are you guys doing okay today?
Absolutely.
All right, we got a lot to talk about, guys. This is a very important topic about higher education. Times are a-changing, as they say. And Francisco, I'm going to start with you. We're here to talk about, is higher education still valuable? Why are we even asking that question? So let's start with that.
Well, of course, it is valuable, and I'm sure it will be in the future. There is no doubt about that. You know, all the evidence in terms of economic and social returns and externalities about the value of higher education shows that even after the pandemic world. Of course, the big question is not only if higher education is still valuable, but how higher education can be more valuable, and secondly, how that value can be widened, can be extended to many in the world that still don't have that opportunity. And that's where I believe in the post-pandemic world, we need to challenge our traditional assumptions and dogmas about higher education. We need to question how we can make something that allows the value of higher education being higher, being more relevant, not only to the individuals, but more important to the societies in which they live, and how can benefit more number of people in the world. Still, we need to recognize that unfortunately, there are few, and we are part of that. We are part of the few who have benefited from education, while there are many in the world who have exactly the same right as us, but who didn't have the same opportunity. And that's what should be our responsibility in higher education.
Thank you, sir. Nieves, I'm going to go over to you because you have quite the breadth of knowledge, and you are intersecting with children of all ages through the work that you do. Talk about higher education and its perceived value through the pipeline of education a little bit. Same question. Why are we here talking about the value of higher education?
Yes, thank you. Well, that's a very interesting question because I feel that the whole education system is so siloed, and there are insufficient conversations between schools, K through 12 schools, and then the world of university, and then the corporate world. And if we do have conversations, they are just very specific. It's not about creating that continuum, that lifelong learning journey that we all talk so much about, but seems to be externalized and distributed in this small kind of stocks of knowledge, if I may say so. So we're failing. I mean, we're failing society because we don't hold all those right conversations. Because of course, universities say, "Oh, schools are students coming from schools are not sufficiently prepared." But did you tell them what you needed? And it's what universities need, exactly what society needs. Have you had these other conversations? So I think we are in a crossroads right now where we cannot continue to have a failing system that's not really optimizing the results, that's not being efficient, and that it's failing. Again, as Francisco mentioned, so many million kids across the world. And those who are at universities and are at schools might not be getting the type of personalized learning journey or the type of learning experience they certainly deserve.
And Ben, I'm going to go over to you. Of course, I'm saving the most important voice here for last, the student voice. Ben, what is the confusion? What is the right conversation we should be having around higher education? Because you started Minerva to be a disruptor in the space. So talk about what is missing and what needs to be filled.
Yeah, I think that's a really important follow-on to that initial question of why are we having this conversation? And we actually started Minerva not to disrupt, but to reform. And there's a very fundamental difference in that approach because what higher education is doing is in many ways begging to be disrupted. We're having this conversation because higher education has spent decades doing whatever it can to delegitimize itself in the public perception. Given the statistics that Francisco correctly quoted, you look at historical results. You get a college degree, you have far better, at least correlative outcomes in income and career and even longevity. Why is it that higher education is under constant attack? And I think that's what Nieves was talking about, that higher education becomes less and less relevant. Employers look at people who come out of higher education institutions and say, well, we thank you for sifting through the people initially, that you saved us some time in finding good people with raw intellectual horsepower. You didn't do anything with them for 4 years, but at least you saved us some trouble of looking. And that is a catastrophic problem, because the reality is that deepening education, systematic thinking, is crucial for the world. And higher education, and in many ways high schools to a certain extent as well, are the only institutions in society that can provide that. But when they choose not to provide systematic thinking as the core of what they do, they then enable others to come in and say, wait a second, I can find you smart high school graduates. I can find you smart middle school graduates. I'll skip all that, wasted time in between. I'll just hand them right to the employer. And more people are starting to buy off on that trope. And that's extraordinarily dangerous for society. So I think that's why we're having this conversation, and this is what we need to do. We have to find a way to reform institutions of secondary and post-secondary education to actually recommit to systematic education of their students and center education away from really what is not useful for society to a broad application of wisdom.
Archika, over to you. Speaking of systematic thinkers, you are one, and you're very, very impressive, I have to tell you, with what you've done in just a short period of time. You attend university now, and you are connected to a lot of youth, and the theme of this conference is to unmute the youth. What are college students saying about the value of higher education? Give us the down and dirty that you hear on a daily basis, all the stuff that we don't know as administrators. What's really being said?
Yeah, that's a really good question. As a quick disclaimer, I am one student from one university, so what I say may not apply to every single college student, but I think probably the biggest thing, and I think Nieves talks about this idea of how higher education institutions are failing in certain ways, is that they're not listening to the most key stakeholder at hand, which are the students. We almost have no say in how our classes are developed, how we're learning, who we're learning from, all these different things that are just so fundamental to that 4-year experience and maybe developing us into individuals that are ready to go out into the real world and contribute in meaningful ways, and that's not happening. So I think the largest complaint that I hear is that a lot of the times when we're taking classes, which is really the fundamental purpose of why we're there to learn, we're not enjoying it and we don't want to do it. And I'll go through year and after year and look at course reviews of like the courses that are mandatory that we have to take, and all the students are like, oh, I don't like this course, like don't take this course unless you have to take it, or this isn't taught properly, and it's not changing. And I'm like, it's so easy. We're literally giving you that review every single semester that this is not working, and they just aren't incentivized, especially at an institution that I go to like Princeton, where no matter what they do, employers will still come knocking on the door and be like, okay, we're gonna take your students. We're not actually getting that development or that growth unless they're gonna listen to us. I also had another conversation the other day outside of the classroom thinking about entrepreneurship and innovation on campus with a dean. And she was talking about how they're creating this physical space on the other side of campus that no one lives on, where students can go and collaborate. It's a hub for innovation. I'm like, no one's gonna go there. Like, it's so far. And maybe if you talk to 5 students about this, they would tell you that's a long walk. No one's going to sit there for 2 hours and hope that someone shows up and they can collaborate and innovate with them. So I think those are 2 very fundamental examples of where we're falling short in terms of why we need to listen to students and why we need to make it more valuable by utilizing the student's perspective specifically.
It's funny when somebody says physical space now, investment in physical space, everybody goes, oh. because we have this thing called a pandemic that we are still dealing with. And it has changed, fundamentally changed how we view and perceive higher education and how people experience it. It's funny. I intersected with two gentlemen here that are part of the media a group. One of them is taking a gap year, which gap years weren't really a thing. They weren't really classified as something that you do until the pandemic hit, and it was, well, I'll take a gap year. Before that, you were just somebody that didn't go to college for a year, and and then the other gentleman, he decided to drop out because he couldn't get the classes he wanted to take. There's a lot of issues that we have to work through, and we know that the pandemic has added to and intensified those issues to an unbelievable level. Francisco, I'll come back to you. Talk about the global disruption that the pandemic has caused for higher education. What has it done to our perception of cost? And coming back to the value conversation, what are we dealing with right now?
Yeah, well, one of the sort of the clear sort of lessons that higher education in the world learned quickly during the pandemic is that many of the premonitions about the end of higher education, about the obsolete business and operational model of higher education, in a way were confirmed. Peter Drucker years ago said, universities will disappear. Buildings are not needed anymore. The operational model of universities is completely out of the picture. In a way, suddenly in just 3 weeks, the entire higher education system of the world was collapsed. We never imagined that would happen. But about 40% of the students in the world in higher education didn't have a chance to continue education for almost 2 years, meaning a significant accumulated deficit in learning that it will disappear. Now that we are sort of going back to some kind of normal life, that deficit will stay there. That lack of learning that students had during that time, it won't be erased. So that is a significant challenge that this generation of students will face no matter what. And of course, we have something to do about it. Now, secondly, I think something that it has been very clear is that, as I mentioned before, many of our assumptions about what higher education is have been truly challenged. Are rankings as important as we believe?
That's a
Is
good
the
question.
academic content as we have in the classroom is the one that is needed? Are we, the students, are learning for what we teach, or independently of what we teach, or even despite of what we teach? Are we making enough efforts to recognize that learning happens outside of the classroom? That probably sometimes students know more than teachers. And of course, that assumption that the teachers are the ones who know, that the school is the one that need to tell you what to learn, it is being challenged today. So that's one of the reasons why in Qatar Foundation, in our ecosystem of 8 top-level higher education institutions, we are working so hard to try to see how do we shift that paradigm of higher education, how we empower the students as the central learners, the central actors of the process, and how do we make sure that we don't forget that at the end of the day, education is not only about work, but more important, about life and society.
One thing is very clear as we move through the questions on this panel is we could talk about this for more hours than
Of
we
course.
have. And excited, it will be an exciting conversation, but we're going to have to move quick. Ben, coming over to you from what Francisco said, because I know a bit about Minerva, and I know that, a part of what you're trying to do, as you said, is transition that narrative to, elitism is a thing. It's a real thing that exists, right? As Francisco said, students look at rankings and they go, oh, this is the number 3 school for this. And they may make a decision on university based on that ranking. When you actually look into those rankings, it's very convoluted on how they are created and what the value is on those.
Right.
How does higher ed need to break free of that hold?
Yeah, it's the central question because rankings, reputation are really the driver of outcomes for students, of selection criteria. But it is for a reason. They are self-fulfilling prophecies, and the reason for that is that effectively today in the world you have 2 kinds of universities. You have neutral universities and you have negative universities. What do I mean by that? A neutral university is a highly selective university that, by and large, chooses good students, but also chooses some pretty bad students. Somebody donated a building, legacies, great great grandfather went here, etc. And so, why is it neutral? Because an employer, which is usually has graduates of that university, can say, well, I went to that school. There are a lot of bozos there. There are a lot of good people, but I'm going to give you a shot, and I'll interview you and see what it is that you know, knowing that you didn't actually learn it in school. Then there are negative universities. What are negative universities? Negative universities typically don't have that elitism. They don't have that history of the great grandfather putting it all and all the rest. But what they do have, unfortunately, because of that, is a stigma, right? Somebody looks at graduates of those universities and says, well, why couldn't you get into the better university? And so it's already a blemish they have to overcome. What the Minerva movement is trying to do, and in fact is doing, is creating the first positive universities in the world. And a positive university says, when you graduate from a Minerva design program, whether it be a Minerva University or any of our partner institutions, we know as employers that you are a better systematic thinker, that you're a better problem solver, you're a better collaborator than any graduate of any other university in the world, because you actually went through 4 years of intensive, systematic, real-world connected education. And that's ultimately the only way to break the tyranny of the rankings. It is to actually have the education and the outcomes of students speak for themselves. And that will effectively delegitimize the way that rankings are currently done, which is basically how much a research university conducts.
Interestingly, as you all know, I'm co-founder of the EdUp Experience podcast, and we've interviewed, 150 or so college and university presidents, global leaders in higher ed. You've intersected with us. Rankings become a marketing tool. When the recording is not on, people will talk
Right.
about the rankings not really having any value.
I have this huge problem of saying things when the recording is on.
Right.
I really shouldn't be saying.
But when the recording is on, oh yes, we're so.
Or we complain about the rankings until we are in the rankings.
Yeah.
Then we
Yeah.
say, now we
Then
are
it's number one. Yeah,
Yeah,
number
yeah.
one. Nieves, talk about, and Ben is talking about jobs, and he's talking about employers. And you reach down through the educational pipeline, and at one point in our history, it wasn't necessarily about a job. It was about the student experience going to higher education, and I think still is to some degree. You coming of age, you develop global skills. I think that's still important, especially in a world where automation is becoming more and more taking over, and human skills really define our value. How important are jobs to students coming up through the educational pipeline? Are they talking about work and jobs and future and career, or is it, I don't know, maybe I'll go to college?
Well, according to just recent surveys, and unfortunately, I might say for most students still, it's very transactional going to university. I mean, they're really going to it because they want to get a job. It's not so much about the transformation, about the experience of what we're all talking about, and what we're most of us trying to do. It's about the transactional kind of opportunities they're going to get once they get there. On the other side, we do realize that this thing about getting a job, or this idea about the future of jobs and jobs disappearing, it won't be so much jobs as tasks that we are externalizing. And then there will be others that really talk to those human attributes. That's part of the new purpose that universities we should be giving ourselves, because we are in the process, I feel, where we have to repurpose higher education. It's not that we are or we are not relevant, it's what is relevant for society. And if this is relevant for society, then how are we serving those needs? And this is relevant for our students, then how are we serving their needs? And this idea of really helping them develop those competencies that will allow them to be able to shift from doing one task to doing another one and incorporating a new one, and then of course learning for life is what I think is at the heart of the conversation. I think universities, to stay relevant in the market, so as to say, we need to be thinking not just about 18 to 22, 24-year-olds, we need to be thinking about 24 to 100-year-olds, because that's really where we have to work. If it is a learning society and we want to play a leading role as learning organizations, then we should be which is the new model for those, we need to play differently, and that the whole world of reskilling, upskilling, outskilling, and all the skilling stuff that we talk about so much, because we need to. I think is a place for universities to be able to play, as I say, a major. Are we there now? I'm not sure we are. We are still talking about executive education from universities. I think we have this whole vocabulary that's probably not correct. Are we having the right conversations? Again, it's about conversations with companies. We're probably just in the old traditional model of relating to them. I think it's completely new landscape right now.
In higher education, we do like our single words like skill and upskill and reskill and path and flex, and we have all of these words that we like to use. Archika, based on what Nieva said about the transaction of higher education, students today are more consumeristic than they maybe were 20 years ago, even 10 years ago. There's a transaction that's being made. There's a consumer thought process. I'm investing money. I should get something in return. How real is that? From the students that you're talking to and intersecting with, are they thinking in that way? And the reason I ask is because I think even when you add something like the pandemic onto it, people have lost jobs. They are more careful about what they buy. There's a risk tolerance. Should I go somewhere where I'm going to be around a lot of people or not go around a lot of people? So there's a lot more consideration on how somebody buys. So talk about that consumer tendency.
Yeah, no, I think there's definitely truth to that statement. I was reading a survey the other day at UCLA where they surveyed the incoming class of freshmen, and 85% of them said we're here because we want to get a job. So it very much is a high demand of students, and I think it's a reasonable one. We can romanticize higher education and be like, okay, like this is all about like learning and stuff like that, which is very, very real and very true. But I think there's a duality to it where you do want to develop yourself, you do want to learn, you do want to equip yourself with the skills to just go into the real world. But also, higher education, the cost of it has increased by 200% in the past 20 years. And so we are looking for a return on our investments because, we can graduate. And then if we've spent so much money on this, for some students, out of their own pocket or through loans, or through other sorts of financial aid means, and then you're kind of sitting there and you're like, I am not employed, I can't financially sustain myself. It doesn't seem as fun in retrospect. So I think it's a valid concern that students have, and I think you can do both. You can learn how to be a contributor in this world, and you can be well-rounded. You can have these global experiences of bringing together students from all around the world to learn from each other and to learn from really cool faculty and professors. But also you can equip them to do what they want to do post-college, whether that's contributing in a specific career that they're looking to go into, whether that's starting their own company or nonprofit or whatever it is, that should be equally incentivized. Those opportunities. I think where we see a problem is where conventionally schools will kind of create these tracks for students, and like especially at my school, go into investment banking, go into big tech, go into consulting, and that's where I see the biggest problem, where students kind of feel you go in and you've written your essays about how you want to change the world and you want to do all these cool things, and then you go and work for Goldman Sachs, and that's great and all, but that's not necessarily what you entered or the experience that you said that you wanted to achieve within those 4 years. So I think that is the biggest problem that I see as a student, where I'm a computer science major, and what I'm really interested in is like education, public policy, and tech. But everyone around me is like Facebook, Google, Microsoft, and I'm like, oh, like, is this something that I should also be thinking? And the school kind of reinforces that by not really providing that alternative perspective or landscape for us to look towards. So I think that's what I've noticed more so.
So what do you think needs to change for you to have, because when we talk about higher education, whether it has value still or not, a lot of times the conversations are of a negative nature. Here's what's wrong with higher education. Here's how to fix higher education. There are some things that are still right. But what would you change to make it more right for you? Because you obviously are in college, so you made a conscious decision to go to college. What do you think you would change if you could pick one thing?
One thing out of anything. I think that I would have students be able to design and have a larger say in what kind of coursework they do, especially in making it interdisciplinary. This semester, we have a new cryptocurrency class that was just launched, and that filled up so fast. There was such a high demand for it, and that's because a student went to a faculty member was like, "This is the new big thing. Like, let's learn about it. Let's stay up to date." So I think students bring that new realistic perspective that like professors who wrote a really cool book in 1980s about like operating systems, they're very qualified. But today there's like a different digital age that we're kind of going into. And I obviously speak from a computer scientist perspective, but this has to do with really any field, and having students at the forefront of understanding what those classes are teaching, like it's really what we want to learn. It's kind of how like a business customer relationship works in that way. Like we should be getting what we are asking for, and then also understanding how we're taught that by like sometimes there's one of our classes where a student wrote one of our assignments that we did this semester, and it was probably one of the best assignments that we had because it was written from the perspective of someone who is actively in the stage of learning. I think that is a big change that I would institute, where we're not more like token, like put us on a committee and we'll talk to the president like every other month or something, but we're actually actively involved in the coursework, the curriculum, the opportunities within the classroom, and then also outside of the classroom in terms of what we're given on campus.
That's why I like the title of this conference.
Yeah.
Precisely for that, because
Exactly.
we need to make sure that the ones who make decisions about their education are the students. But anyways,
Well, when you go on to invent whatever you're going to invent, which I'm sure will be significant, just remember who didn't give you the choice. When they want to give you input into your product. I'm going to go to Ben on this one, and this comes from an audience member. Just really a question to all panelists. So you guys can take it as it comes. What's the view of alternative credentialing and its potential to break the degree cartel, which is a huge factor in the astronomical costs?
Yep.
Whatever the value of higher ed that Dr. Marmolejo talks about, the costs are completely out of control. I actually know who this audience member is, believe it or not. Over to you, Ben.
Yeah. So I think that really is one of the core problems when you have 85% of your students show up saying, "I'm here for a job," because especially in an American context, but the reality is the rest of the world follows. Sometimes it's not the family that winds up paying; it's society, it's a funder, etc. But the idea that you take 4 years and $250,000, and now is more than that, in order to find a job, is insane. It's the worst possible way to get a job, right? And so, if all of a sudden an alternative pathway to get a job comes up, and this is what we were talking about earlier around the difference between disruption and reform, if that continues to be the narrative, universities can only rely on the license raj. They can only rely on the fact that if you want to be a doctor, a lawyer, a dentist, a veterinarian, they have an oligopoly. You have to go to a university to do that. But if you want to code, if you want to be an entrepreneur, if you want to go into business, if you want to run a nonprofit, why would I go and spend that much money and that much time if an alternative pathway can identify me early and provide me over? And this is really the testament. When I designed the Minerva curriculum when I was a first-year college undergraduate, and of course, the version I designed back then is nearly what we do now, but it was better than anything my Ivy League university offered. And the damning evidence is that when a learner can show up to an institution and say, "Boy, what you're teaching me is so bad, I could do better," right? And it's true. That is a wake-up call for the university, not at that point to abdicate its responsibility and says, "Great, you go and do it." It should say, "Oh my God, we have to create a curriculum that you as a student could say, wow, I could give you input to, but boy, is that better than what I could come up with myself." Yeah. And if we don't do that, these alternative credentials will demolish this system. And that's something that the second order effects of anti-intellectualism, the ability to not be able to intervene and create citizens and real global residents, that universities have to play a role to preserve a dynamic and open society. Those are things that universities must offer, and they have to be there. And alternative credential providers, if universities continue to do what they're doing now, the alternative credential providers will destroy the system. And that's a moment which we as a collective have to do something about.
And Francisco, I'm going to come to you, and I just one thought before you take it. one of the pieces about the alternative credentialing providers, it is very confusing, and there are many, and it's very hard to collate those skills into something that makes sense. You know something that kind of makes sense, and you've talked about it before. I'm teeing you up a little bit here, but I think you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, as I reflect on this very interesting conversation, I make an invitation to the ones which are here today at physically, because just across the aisle, across the street, is Education City, which in my opinion is the most amazing experiment in education in the world that brings together educations from kindergarten to doctoral education, which allows students to take one class in Georgetown University or another class in Texas A&M University or another one in engineering, one in music, you name it. So it is a very interesting ecosystem. Now, why I say this? Because we have, a number of flagship initiatives. Ben was one of the experts, global experts that help us to shape these ideas, and others. And basically, all of them are responding to this core question that you are asking today. Let's say, for instance, general education. Is that a good one we have today? There is a significant room for improvement. Why? Because students learn well about the subjects, but probably they need to learn more about skills for success, as Denise Amiotti was mentioning yesterday at a meeting we had on one of the initiatives. Path for You, which means basically allowing students to create their own pathway, similar to what Gwen was referring to. Universal Skills Passport. How do we find ways not only to record the grades that the student have in the regular classroom, which eventually will result in a GPA of 3.0, which most likely you will have, but that doesn't reflect anything else that you are adding. So what we are putting together here is the Universal Skills Passport, an opportunity to record, to collect, to curate all those alternative learning experiences that the students are having, that then may allow her or him, when they graduate, to say, I am here with a grade, with a degree, but also because I know this and this and this, and also I have those additional skills, and also I have been assessed on all of these things. So this is who I am. This is what I have available in order to become a successful and productive and happy and, of course, contributing individual in society. Other flagship initiatives, one has to do with information. If we don't know what is in the labor market, if we don't know what are the key trends, it's going to be very difficult for universities to adapt their educational contents. And two more, internal information as well, and the other one, faculty development. If we don't work with teachers, with faculty members, many things won't change. They need to make sure that faculty members also have a change on the chip. Otherwise, it will continue this idea that I am the one who knows because I'm the faculty members, and you are the one who doesn't know because you are the student.
Nieves, this conversation around alternative credentials, a lot of it has, and I truly believe it is confusing because universities now will offer alternative credentials. You see tech companies offering alternative credentials. Your best friend who's in real estate offers a alternative credential. Somebody that wants to sell you something offers an alternative credential. It's very confusing. Talk about what students think, though. Do they see different pathways? And the reason I ask is because the one downside of the alternative credentialing, I'm going to say downside, but what makes it confusing, we understand degree. People understand it's packaged. Good or bad, we understand it. Alternative credentialing is not packaged in the way a universal skills passport would package it. So talk about how students, from your perspective, understand alternatives to going for a college degree.
Yes, well, I think just listening to all of you, I do realize that I think we are nearer to disruption than to reform right now. I mean, I think this everything that's just recently happened and the whole conversation we're holding and these new players coming into this landscape with credentials and with alternatives for our students, that looks pretty much like disruption. Only we have these very thick walls where we certified. Someone said the diploma cartel. I mean, like we're certifying this, and so we're in this place where we think we are untouchable, and actually our students know that that's not the case, and society starts to understand things this way, and also companies start to understand things this way. So what's the reaction of students? They're learning on their own. I mean, they are learning so much more out of classrooms than in the classrooms. They are making their own choices. They decide whether they're going on YouTube, whether you're going, and I'm happy to see you're nodding, because we all actually, we've done a little of that, all of us, over the past 2 years. I mean, we had to learn so many things, and we were just looking for our ways through the internet, and really understanding which made more sense to our learning style and to our learning needs, etc. That's what students do currently. They play the game. They play the game of going to college because of this transactional idea they have. That's something they have to go through. And if they're lucky enough that their university complements with, a competency-based program or a skills passport, that's terrific. But why don't we just embed them? I mean, it had to be an only curriculum. And if we talked a little more to students, we would be able to co-create that. It's not a nice thing to have on. It's not an add-on. It feels like we are pushed to implement all those things so that we can still attract students, and that we can still seem to be servicing society. But that's definitely not the way forward, because this is more profound. This is really about the whole disruption of the system. And whether we want it or not, these new players are here to come, and our users are going to make their choices. This is the only service that's not user-centric. It's just everything's user-centric, but not learning. So we talk about learning-centric education models, and we all cheer. But it should always have been about a user-centric kind of model, where you co-create with the user needs the whole model. And that's the path forward, and that is going to require very profound changes. And with COVID, I think we've had this phenomenal lab of experiences, of experiments, that we can really not let go. We cannot forget any of what we learned, and we can definitely not go back to the old normal, which is no longer there.
Francisco, do you think universities, colleges and universities, do a good job communicating their own value? And we can talk about the value of colleges and universities, right? Do you think the college and university staff, faculty, administration, do you think that we in higher education are doing a good job to convince the public that the value is still there? Or do you think that it's just so embedded and assumed that colleges and universities don't really have to do that much about it? Because
Not really. Not really. I think there is a significant room for improvement in communicating more effectively what higher education is about. Ben was mentioning about the fact that it is not only about money. Money is a significant factor. We already had indicated that. That's a major driving force behind the decision of a family or a student to go to college, because there is the assumption that she or he will have, better conditions in life. But it's much more than that. First of all, higher education is about healthier individuals. It's about more socially conscious individuals. It's about more tolerant individuals. It's about, of course, a sense of responsibility to the community. So it is much more than that. It is about, of course, the contribution of research in the case of universities. And even in many cases, higher education is about even tasks that, in theory are not part of higher education, but that in a way higher education is assuming, because probably institutions in society are unable to fulfill their job. We are seeing that during the pandemic. In how many countries in the world had been precisely the universities, the ones who has been serving as a site to testing, to do the vaccination, to do things that in theory should be done by others. Even finding laptops and computers for the students, because the students otherwise won't be able to continue their education. Even universities now are having to assume the role to find a job for the students, which eventually a university might say, well, this is not my job, but again, I have to do it because that's the way that I can demonstrate that I do things. Now, are we communicating properly that value of higher education? Not really. We need to do much more, and which is a paradox, because if there is any place in which we can build the evidence of why higher education is important, is in higher education. And many times we don't know. The typical way to demonstrate that is that all universities in the world will claim that they are preparing the best students and that they will become the best graduates in the world. But now when you ask the university, can you demonstrate that to me? The typical response from the university is, oh yeah, one of our students was X, Y, and Z, and now she is the CEO of a company. So far, consequently, we are successful. And then you say, okay, that was one out of 200,000. What happened with the other 200,000? Well, we really don't know. Do we do efforts in higher education to trace our students, our graduates? Do we know if what they are doing in life 5 years after graduation happened because the university experience or even despite of the university experience? We don't know. Do we know if the students are learning in the classroom? I remember a study that we conducted when I was working at the World Bank, comparing India, China, Russia. And basically, we're making a very simple assessment. How much a student knows when she enters or he enters a class, and how much he or she knows when is ending the course in mathematics. And in some countries, it was a shocking learning. Why? Because students knew more when they initiated the class, the class
Oh my goodness.
than when they graduated. So they not only didn't learn, they de-learned. So, and it's as simple as conducting the same assessment day zero and day whatever at the end of the classroom. So we need to do more in our higher education institutions to build evidence first, and secondly, to communicate that more properly to the entire society. Sorry for the long response.
No, that's good. And Ben, to you on the same kind of question here, because Francisco's talking about data, analytics, proof.
Absolutely.
But then when you have all of that, marketing, and that whole continuum isn't necessarily mastered in higher ed. So talk about what your perceptions of that.
Well, it not only is it not mastered, but one of the real problems is that, you know, the reason that the universities say, "Oh, look at that one graduate," is because they don't want you to see the aggregate.
Yeah.
And you know, Francisco was talking about measuring in day one, measuring on the last day. When you look at the science of learning research, they measure 6 months after, and whatever you retained on that last day, Harvard students forget 90% of what they tested correctly 6 months after the end of a course. Non-Harvard students retain between 5 and 8%.
Well, Ben, if I can say something, which eventually might be good. Probably
Yeah,
what you
yeah,
retain
correct.
is not useful. You have to memorize to pass the
Correct.
test and then
Exactly.
forget about it.
So the one I think maybe, and I'll tie it to one of the themes early on, is, to me, this really was the unspoken lesson of the pandemic in higher education, which I actually am stunned that people haven't understood more broadly. The pandemic basically demonstrated that if you don't use technology to make your education better and have the philosophy that technology is a tool to do things that you cannot do offline, when you implement technology, your education will be worse. Right? The easiest way to analogy that I can think of, and I don't know if any of you have spent time in New York 10, 15 years ago, but effectively, the taxis in New York were told, hey, you should use technology. Their solution was put a loud screen where the button to turn off the volume doesn't work and have it scream at you on a 5-minute loop in order and play you ads.
Ads, that's it.
That was the way the taxis used technology to make their experience better. Whereas if you go to somebody and say, hey, how can you make a ridership a better experience using technology? They come up with Uber.
Yeah.
Higher education is the exact same thing. They have a fundamentally broken product. And instead of saying, well, what is the problem here? It's, you know, professors teach whatever they want, the classes are disconnected, people don't actually learn. When they do learn, they learn the wrong things. How can we actually rethink curricula, rethink pedagogy, rethink data and feedback using technology to do things we can't do offline? That's the way to buffet and reform universities and allow them not to be disrupted. What happens instead? Oh my God, we need to use technology right away. Let's take the thing that doesn't work offline and make it vastly worse by putting it on technology. And the entire education technology sector is that. It's how do we make what you currently do offline terribly even worse by giving it to more people.
Archica technology, computer science. I think they're similar. So online learning, obviously, it exploded during the pandemic, and you probably experienced it to some degree, even though you may not have been expecting it. Talk about your experiences with online. What future does online learning play in your education and the education of students around you?
Yeah, so I did my entire freshman year of college virtual in some capacity. First semester at home in my bedroom, and then second semester on campus, but still through my computer. And what I can say is I don't really remember much about what I did. We
You
were talking
remember
about
you were in your
retention.
bedroom. That's good.
Yeah, I do remember that I
You
was in
passed
my
the
bedroom.
test on the.
Exactly. Like they were talking about retention over here, and I was like, I might just fall into that statistic, sadly. But what I do know is that of what I remembered, it was of project-based learning, and I always feel like project-based learning is like, oh, we do that in elementary school or middle school or high school. Like you use your like spaghetti and marshmallows, put them together, get your hands dirty, and then you get to college and it's lectures and. Then you take a test, and I'm like, wow, this is not, I am gonna forget this as soon as I need to, basically. So I think that technology is actually a really good supplementary role in education. Like even though now that we're back basically fully in person on campus, some people don't even show up to lecture. Will watch it on 2 times speed and retain more from it, and then they'll go to the precepts where they're more interactive and hands-on, and you're working actively in a small group to like apply what you learn, and they're gonna do great. So I think that technology isn't necessarily like a bad thing. Like learning online, I don't think is bad necessarily at all. I think if it's supplemented with the right kinds of learning and ways of learning that foster collaboration, that foster project-based learning, that foster applying the knowledge you have like as a leader within the classroom by having ownership over what you're doing, I think then it can be really, really helpful and save time, if anything.
Nieves, I want to come back to something you said, which higher education is not just about the 18-year-old student who's going to college, but the adult student, 24 to 100. I am closer to 24 than I am 100. I got
like it.
both my master's degree and my doctoral degree fully online. I had kids, and I did it in that way. So when we talk about student, who are we talking about? I think that has to be defined, because when you just say student and you try to apply all these things to everybody, it doesn't work. What about adult students in online learning? Is it the future?
Yeah, well, that's a very good point because when we talk about students, we don't know what we're talking about, and there are all types of institutions are starting to grow, serving different types of students, which is very good. But one of the problems we have within that formal education system is that we have this fixed idea about this as a college student, this is a graduate student, a master's, whoever, and the needs are different, and the needs are for everyone because actually this thing about learning is for all of us the rest of our lives. I mean, no market can be any bigger. I mean, no surprise. There's so many players coming into our scenario because this is actually is for everyone all of our lives, and it's not something, it's not a choice that we can make. There are choices we make about things we buy, but whether we learn or we do not learn, that's not a choice. We definitely will have to learn because we'll have to change jobs and we'll have to adapt to the new reality and we'll have to be flexible, etc., etc. So of course there are different types of audiences, and that's one of the big challenges for formal higher education institutions. I'll say again for universities, being able to reach out to those other students and focus on giving them added value to their whole professional learning, etc. For that, we will probably need to create larger ecosystems. We should not be doing this on our own. We should be talking to those other partners. We should be creating a broader kind of network of experiences where our students will go in and out, coming into our academic facilities, but then going elsewhere and then doing this online. This is going to be much more fluid, I said, or liquid, and I think that's there that we're going to find those new students who just they're waiting and they have their needs and they are looking. I mean, they're doing their own thing, they're learning, but how can we help them? How can we help them learn better? How can we guide them? And just a tiny comment, I could not agree more with you, Ben, when you say about the use of technology. And we've been cramming technology when it has such a phenomenal transformational kind of capacity, and we've been cramming it into school classrooms, K through 12, with little children, with older ones, and that's why it's definitely not working. The system's broken, and it won't work any better with technology. I cannot agree more. I'm sorry.
It's okay. We have one final question, but before I get there, I like to do things that are not always on script. So I'm going to ask the audience, just by a show of hands, if you think higher education still has value, put your hand up, and then I'm going to ask you if you think that value is in question. So just by a show of hands, how many of you think higher education still has massive value? And how many of you think higher education's value is in question? Wow, really interesting. All right, so here we go. Final question. We're here to discuss whether higher education has value. You get to go last, so you have to wait. Nieves,
Okay.
does higher education still have value? Your final thoughts.
It does, but I think that we are in a turning point where we have to find our sense of purpose. I think that the pandemic has challenged us to make that reflection. We definitely need to find a new sense of purpose. Probably the reasons why higher education institutions, universities were created over 1,000 years ago need to change because society has changed a lot. So to stay relevant, we need to understand what that relevance is and what our students are asking for us, and what are those human. If education is about humanizing human beings, then what are those human attributes that we need to work on, and that we need to help our students develop for them to be productive and happy citizens for a better world.
Ben, does higher education still have value?
Higher education, to build on what Nieves is saying, has decreasingly less value because it is not kept up with modernity. And we now are at an inflection point because we have the tools to actually provide greater value in higher education than it has ever had in the past. But it cannot be the same basis. It has to be reformed.
Francisco, you've probably been experienced higher ed or experienced it in multiple countries in multiple ways across the globe, maybe more than 90% of the people in this room, maybe more than 100%. Does higher education still have value?
Absolutely. It has a value, no question about it. Do I question higher education? For sure, and we should. But if we think about, let's say in India, where I was before I moved to Doha, if we think about the fact that 6.8 new higher education institutions have been established per day, including Saturdays and Sundays, in the last 10 years. Do we think that there is a value for higher education? For sure. It is a diminishing value? Of course. Do we need to revalue higher education? Absolutely. But I'm an endless optimistic. And I truly believe that the conditions of today's world basically signal towards the need for more, but more important, for better higher education.
Last but certainly not least, Archika, does higher education still have value?
I definitely think it has value. The way that I see it almost in my head is that kind of if you go into a restaurant and then you get a menu, you don't like anything on the menu, but you're like, okay, I'm going to order something anyways. You don't like what you're getting to eat. And if enough customers are going into that restaurant and not liking the food, that restaurant's probably going to shut down sometime soon. I think there's kind of a peculiar relationship right now between universities, especially very old universities, and their students, where that relationship isn't really, they're not on the same page. I don't think that dynamic is really playing out to the value that it can have. So I think there's a lot of things that need to happen, and I don't think it's an enigma. I think it's quite simple, and I think that starts with listening to the students and the people who are actually going through this education and trying to derive that value out of it, because at the end of the day, who decides that value? The students themselves.
Well, there you go. Unmute the Youth. Archika Dogra, Ben Nelson, Francisco Malejo, Nieves Segovia. I'm Joe Salustio, and only you can answer the question, does higher education still have value? Thank you, everybody.